Okie dokie, bolt cutters, and what are we clipping today? Welcome back to Y.E.S, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Fetch the Bolt Cutters, the 5th studio album released by Fiona Apple. Yes, I'm behind on this one, but I have good reason for it. This was not something I originally thought I was going to care about reviewing. But then one of my good fellow YouTube friends, Ryan from True North Reviews, reviewed it, and he made a pretty compelling case as to why it's something that other people should pay attention to. And I dug a little bit more into it, and what do you know, it seems to be a pretty important album this year. But do you have to like it? That's where we're going to go right now in this video. So firstly, it's very important to note that this album and genre style is art pop or art house pop, one of those two things. I could only really imagine a little bit of what that must be like because I don't really, I guess, delve into that very often, which surprises me a little bit because I do care about the actual artistic aspect of music versus just making the catchy stuff. I would like to have something that has merit in its art, but also something that is pleasing and not just intriguing. You know? It needs to bring other people in and not just the people who have peculiar tastes and all that good stuff. The only other thing that I could really compare this to is to think, what would I compare this to if it was an art house film? Now, I will be honest that I haven't really seen too many of those, but I get a pretty good general idea of what those are like. And many people can find those off-putting. Not because the movie isn't good, but because it isn't technically conventional. There could also be things that are inserted that maybe you don't like or you find awkward or maybe offensive. Probably not to that level, but, you know, that's subjective. And for this album, I feel pretty similar. I think there's a lot of things in here that are really, really compelling to want to understand, like, how did she come up with that? That was curiously interesting. And then another part of me also thinks, I don't think a lot of people are going to care about this. There was plenty in this album for me to feel reeled in. I'm like, okay, she's trying to do this. I want to pay attention. Bring me closer to what your mind is trying to show me. And then there were also moments where I was feeling a little off. I don't know if I've actually ever used this word in a review before, but I'm going to use it carefully. There are elements of this album that felt somewhat pretentious. Okay, now that I've said that word, let me explain what I mean by that. I don't mean that in intent. I think it's just the tone of certain moments. It's not even really songs that make me think that, or the album as a whole. A lot of it just comes from the tone and moments that I felt in the album. In addition to that, I don't think it was really intentional. So is that just me interpreting that? There is that chance, I will admit that. But I will also say that I think there's a part that makes me think, this may have a chance to come across as a way that maybe other people will think is not really as inviting, or that it's maybe stuck up from a certain perspective. So that's just a small detail that I think a lot of people will be a little bit overreactionary to, but I promise I'm not trying to label the album entirely like that. I really am not. As I said before, there's plenty in this album that was curious enough for me to want to continue to listen to. The title track, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, has these effects that sound like dogs and also heavy breathing that is a little puzzling, but I don't feel deterred from it. You know, it's just like, okay, I guess you chose to do that. And one of the most interesting notes that I wrote down is that she has a very peculiar way, in a positive way. I guess I should use the word nice rather. She has a nice way of ending her songs. There's always something that maybe you're not totally on board with, but somehow it manages to kind of end on a way that makes you think, oh, okay, I guess I'm alright with that. In addition to that, it also made me think of Poetry Slam. And I've had both positive experiences and also just kind of curiously puzzling looks when I go to any of those. Just depends on who's delivering them or what I hear. And that's exactly what this album feels like. It feels like a poetry slam that happens to actually work with melodies and music. So beyond the small aspects that I've mentioned, there are a couple of other things that I would just say I wasn't totally on board with. Such as the song I Want You to Love Me. The word you is kind of drawn out a little bit longer than I think it should be. And the song Ladies kind of is repeatedly bland, just kind of does it. There's a lot of repetition that I think people will just automatically cast off as saying repetition is not that great. But I think it can be useful, but in this case I was not totally with it. One more positive highlight I can mention on this album is the song Rack of His. Kind of has plucking strings in there. There's something to admire about that, the way that it was incorporated into the song. So I'm just trying to figure out other positive things I can say about this because I don't want this to come off as negative. But I am trying to say, despite other people who have had amazingly raving reviews for that, and if you love it, more power to you, I'm just not totally convinced that this is kind of the music for me, or that maybe others might be overstepping it possibly. I think there is an open window to both of those routes. So that's just what I'm trying to say. If you like this, I think that's totally cool. If you really don't like this, I can understand that also. Regardless of either of those routes, I think that there does need to be given some credit for the creativity. Now, there are moments where I'm like, that doesn't work out totally, but it's much more ambitious than a lot of other music that I've listened to this year, so I'm just going to comment on that. Not necessarily saying it's going to reflect in how I grade or recommend the album, but I'm saying it was more daring, and sometimes it pulled it off, and sometimes not too much to my liking. So, after having listened and reviewed this album, I'm going to give production a B+, I'm going to give creativity a C, I'm going to give expression and lyrics a C, and how would I recommend this album? I'm going to give it a good. There's totally plenty of reasons as to why people would be fascinated by this album. I don't personally find myself revisiting this album, but I don't think that there's enough negativity in it for me to say a whole lot that would deter me from thinking that other people should give it a chance. Because I think there's plenty of people who would find it just as interesting or potentially mesmerizing. But I acknowledge this isn't for everyone. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow my social media links down in the description, and be sure to leave me one of these, a like for the video. And be sure to leave a comment down below if you want to engage with me as well. And remember, if you want to discover, promote, and review the best in entertainment, be sure to subscribe to this channel so you can get that yes in your life. See you next time. I can only imagine what bolt cutters must feel like in a scenario like this. I usually only use the kind of cutters that would cut grass stuff. I don't need to.